Hi, here this is Dr. Naushad Alam, an assistant professor from Maulana Majrul Haq Arabic and Persian University, Patna. Dear friends, I welcome you in my lecture series, and today I am going to discuss the poem Design written by Robert Frost. Well, to begin, I must say that the poem was published in 1936 in a collection named A Further Range. It was written as a response to traditional depiction of God as a benevolent, all-power being who created humankind in his own good image. Robert Frost rethought this concept of design or creation and produced the poem in order to present what he saw as another side of the equation, that a malevolent, all-powerful being might be responsible for the combination of ingredients. The poem speaks on themes of religion, life, and death. I will discuss this poem in five different aspects. First will be brief summary of the poem, structure, poetic techniques used in this particular poem. Then I'll go for analysis and I'll conclude this lecture with theme that I personally come across or understand while going through the poem. Well, let's begin with summary. The poem begins with the speaker, of course, the poet himself, discussing a spider and a moth. It is an insect he found on the top of a flower. They came together as if kindred spirits in order for a spider to eat the moth. He wonders over the convergence and equates it to which brew. There are a few light-hearted lines in which the speaker plays the potions related imagery. He then moves incestate stanza, the concluding stanza, to discuss design, creation, more broadly, God. Now come to the structure of the poem. This poem by Robert Frost is a 14-line sonnet that is separated into two stanzas. The first is an octave and a stanza of 8 lines, usually divided into quatrains, and quatrain is set of 4 lines, as you know. The second stanza is sestate or 6 lines stanza. Depending on the structure of this particular sonnet, whether it is Shakespearean or Petrarchan, the division can become more intricate. In case of design, Robert Frost has followed the Petrarchan rhyming scheme. It follows a pattern of A B B A A B B A, and sestate is of A C A A C C. Well, another element that marks design as a Petrarchan sonnet is turn or volta. That is usually the first line of the sestate in Petrarchan sonnets. This is a shift actually in the poem that can be seen through change in narrator beliefs or setting. Or you can also say that it is abrupt change of the ideas or tone of the speaker. It can even consist of an answers to questions posed in itself. Like if you differentiate this volta or turn with Shakespearean sonnet structure, normally in Shakespearean sonnet structure, you will find this turn or this volta basically on 12th or 13th line before the concluding couplets. As you know, the Shakespearean sonnet used to have 4 stanza, 3 quatrains, and a couplet. Couplet is a stanza of 2 lines. This is also the case for the design. Now, the rhythm is mainly iambic pentameter in this particular poem. This means that each line contains 5 sets of 2 beats known as metrical feet. The first is anastress and the second is stress. Now, the poetic techniques used in the poem. Well, within this particular poem, Robert Frost has used several poetic techniques. These include alliteration, enjambment, juxtaposition, and caesure. Alliteration occurs when words are used in successions or at least appears close together and begin with the same letter. It appears number of times in the piece, but a few examples include flower and fourth in the seventh, in seven of the first stanza, seventh line of the first stanza, and design and darkness in line number 5 of the second stanza. Juxtaposition appears when two contrasting things are placed near one another in order to emphasize the contrast. A poet usually does this in order to speak on larger theme of their text or make an important point about the difference between these two things. For instance, moth is described in this poem as white stained cloth. White is generally a symbol of innocence or purity. In line 3 of the first stanza and following reference to death and blight. Caesura occurs when a line is split in half, sometimes with punctuation, sometimes without punctuation. There is perfect example of this technique used in the second line of the poem as well as in seventh line. Another important technique commonly used in poetry is enjambment. It occurs when a line is cut off before its natural stopping points, or you can say that poet deliberately moves to the next line, leaving his carrying forward his ideas. For instance, the transition between the fourth and fifth lines of the first stanza in case of this particular poem. Now let's come to the analysis of the poem. In the first line of the poem, the design, the speakers begin by describing a spider he found. It appeared fat and dimpled. These two words, pay attention on. Fat and dimpled. Especially dimpled are generally associated with human beings. These two words help to create a clear picture in the reader's mind of the shape and size of the spider the speaker found. The next lines provides more detail. The spider was white, and Robert first describes through a simile how it was holding a moth, and he says, like a white piece of rigid satin cloth. These two creatures, moth and spider, came upon at once are an example, poet says, or the speaker says, of the character of death and blight. The fourth line of this stanza is enjambed, encouraging a reader to jump quickly to the fifth in order to conclude the phrase. Now, second quadrant of the poem, of 5th to 8th lines. When the 5th line begins, Frost picks up rhythm of design, making use of alliteration and internal rhyme. These lines have a musical quality to them and therefore reference to an even greater extent a portion. Death and blight are the two ingredients needed to begin the morning rite. They are, he states, the parts of witch's broth. The next two lines return to the image of a spider on the flower with the mouth. The moth is carried like a paper kite by the spider. Its dead wings are obvious interest to the speaker, who referred to them in the first stanza as stem and in the second as a paper kite. Now now come to the second stanza. The second stanza provides a different structure for considering life, death, intelligent design, and the intention of the intelligence. Frost ends design with a series of questions. The whole sestet leaves us with questions which are not answered by the poet because he himself has no idea about it. The first and the second have to do with position of a spider on the flower. The first two lines talks about the position of a spider on the flower. Robert first wants to understand, having looked onto it, the speaker wants to understand how it is possible that the world came together so perfectly in order to steer the white moth thither in the night, so that it might end up the spider's mouth. The last two lines, a rhyming couplet. Consider the implication of dark design and how this kind of creator might invent in order to appall. Perhaps Robert Frost is saying the designer of the world created it in order to disgust and inspire fear. Now comes to the fifth part of this discussion, which is of course analysis of the theme. Well, I must say, while Faust's poetry is traditional in form, the poet is known for his dark and modern take on universal themes, such as the experience of God. This poem design is, of course, of no exception. Robert Frost's traditional sonnet is metaphor for the narrator, in his own way trying to control and understand nature's chaos. The poem's imagery of a white spider suggests that even within evil, there is goodness and purity, while the moth represents the spider's prey. Robert Frost mentioned the medical flower, the heal all, which suggests that life is full of both evil and innocence. The moth and the spiders become a symbol for humanity. In other words, we are all product of the natural forces, not spiritual design. Just focus on the last couplet of the poem. The poet writes, "What but design of darkness to appall? If design governs in the thing, so is small." This couplet drives home the viewpoint that there may be no design or God watching over us at all. Thank you for the listening.